Excuse me, sir. Do you happen to know anyone who could help me? I do not have anywhere to sleep tonight." That voice was small and fragile, nearly drowning in the evening bustle of Forsyth Park in Savannah, Georgia. Arthur lifted his gaze from the glowing screen of his smartphone, completely unaware that his actions over the next few minutes would irrevocably alter the trajectory of his existence. Standing in front of him was a little girl, no more than 5 years old. She was wearing a faded floral dress, its once bright pink roses, now washed out by time, weather, and wear. Her light brown hair hung loose and tangled around her small shoulders, carrying the distinct, heartbreaking look of a child who had no one to brush it for her. Her tiny feet were strapped into worn, dusty sandals that offered little protection against the cobblestones. Clutched tightly against her narrow chest was a battered purse. She held it with a fierce desperation, as though it were the single most valuable possession she had left in the entire world. Her small hands were crossed in front of her, displaying a haunting calmness and a rigid defensive posture that no 5-year-old child should ever have to possess. Arthur remained seated on the wrought iron bench, completely frozen, staring at her. She was far too young to be wandering around the historic city squares all by herself. She was far too small to be covered in the grime of the city streets. She was too innocent to carry such a heavy, knowing look in her deep, dark eyes. Yet there she stood on the cobblestone pathway, with the golden, fading light of the late afternoon casting long shadows around her. She was looking at Arthur as if he were the absolute last person on earth she could turn to for salvation. Slowly, almost mechanically, Arthur slid his expensive phone into the inner pocket of his tailored Italian suit. His eyes remained locked onto those large, dark pupils. They did not beg for pity. They did not tremble with fear. They did not shed a single tear. They merely asked a question with a quiet, dignified desperation that threatened to shatter his heavily guarded heart. He sat there staring at the little girl for several agonizing seconds, incapable of forming a single word. In his 5 years of ruthless corporate negotiations, hostile takeovers, and high-stakes business deals, he had witnessed many things. He had seen grown men weep over lost fortunes and rivals crumble under pressure. But he had never, not once, encountered this kind of haunting innocence. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Arthur did something he had not done in years. He slipped off the comfortable wooden slats of the park bench and slowly lowered himself down. He placed the knees of his $1,000 trousers directly onto the dusty stone path, ignoring the dirt just so he could be at eye level with the child. It was a gesture of physical submission he never offered to anyone in his fiercely competitive life. But in the presence of this tiny, weary stranger, it felt like the only appropriate reaction. "What is your name, sweetheart?" he asked. His voice softened into a gentle, soothing register he barely recognized as his own. "Lee," she replied, her voice soft but steady. Arthur felt a warm, affectionate crease form on his forehead. "Lee, that is a beautiful name." "It is Lily," she repeated with absolute seriousness, gently correcting him to ensure he understood the full gravity of her identity. He almost let a smile slip past his guarded lips, but he managed to hold it back out of respect for her solemn, adult-like demeanor. "Lily, are you feeling hungry right now?" She looked down at her dusty sandals. Then she looked back up at his handsome, concerned face. Then she looked down to the ground once more before finally giving a slow, hesitant nod. It was as if admitting her basic human need for food was a tremendous personal defeat. Arthur gently pushed himself up from the ground. His sharp eyes scanned the perimeter of the bustling park, until he spotted a vendor selling warm, salted pretzels and fresh lemonade near the grand fountain. "Come with me, little one. Let us go get something to eat. Is that all right?" he offered, extending a large manicured hand toward her. Lily did not hesitate. She did not shrink away in fear or suspicion. She simply uncrossed her arms, reached out with one of her tiny dirt-smudged hands, and placed it securely inside his massive palm. She trusted him with a sudden, beautiful immediacy that made an unfamiliar ache bloom deep within his chest. 5 minutes later, Arthur found himself sitting back on that exact same park bench. He was completely ignoring the frantic vibrating of his phone in his pocket, opting instead to watch the little girl sitting quietly beside him. She held a large plastic cup of sweet lemonade in her lap and delicately nibbled on a warm, buttery pretzel. She ate in total silence, and through it all, she held her battered purse with her free hand, refusing to set it down on the bench even for a moment. Arthur watched her precise, careful movements with a growing sense of profound curiosity. "What do you have inside that little purse that makes it so special, Lily? You refuse to let go of it," he observed, keeping his tone light and questioning. The little girl stopped chewing her food. She looked down at the frayed fabric of the bag, her small fingers tracing the worn edges, and then turned her large eyes up to meet his gaze. With a level of meticulous care that scraped against the high walls of his heart, she unzipped the main compartment. Slowly, she revealed her hidden treasures to the wealthy stranger. Inside the bag was a tiny, hard-backed blue Bible. Its corners were worn all the way down to the cardboard underneath. Next to it was a neatly folded white tissue, a faded creased photograph, and a piece of crumpled paper containing a handwritten prayer, penned in the large, crooked, uneven letters, typical of a child just learning how to write. "My mama told me that as long as I keep the Bible close to me, the good Lord is always standing right by my side," she explained, pointing a small, slightly sticky finger at the worn blue cover. "And she said it is the most important thing in the whole wide world." As she spoke, with her sweet childish voice, stumbling ever so slightly over the pronunciation of certain longer words, Arthur stared at that pathetic, beautiful little purse. A sudden, crushing wave of absolute shame washed over his entire being. It was a burning, suffocating shame for everything he possessed. Shame for the massive, empty penthouse he lived in. Shame for the fleet of luxury cars he drove. And shame for every single time he had complained about the minor inconveniences of his highly privileged life. Here was a 5-year-old child who was preparing to sleep on the unforgiving concrete streets of the city. She possessed nothing but the clothes on her back and a ragged purse. Yet she clutched that worn Bible speaking about faith and God with the unwavering conviction of someone who possessed all the greatest riches of the universe. "Do you believe in God, mister?" she asked, tilting her head. Her innocent, direct question pierced straight through his hardened corporate armor, striking the very core of his soul. Arthur was struck completely dumb. He sat in stunned silence, staring into the profound depth of her young eyes. He found himself utterly incapable of formulating a lie to comfort her, yet he was deeply unwilling to admit his own spiritual bankruptcy to a homeless child. After a long, heavy pause, he adopted a hushed, gentle tone and decided to steer the conversation toward safer, yet equally terrifying grounds. "What about your mother, Lily? Where is she right now?" he asked, dreading the potential answer that was about to leave those small lips. Lily lifted her small, fragile arm and pointed vaguely toward the fading evening sky. It was a gentle, sweeping gesture, one that was painfully common among young children when they lacked the extensive vocabulary required to explain a massively complex and terrifying situation. She held her hand suspended in the humid savanna air for a moment, her eyes tracking an invisible path upward before letting her arm drop softly back into her lap. "She is at the big hospital," Lily stated, her voice quiet but entirely matter of fact. "She fell down hard and hit her head bad. The people with the loud sirens came, and then she stopped talking. And then I was all alone. Just like that." Those simple, devastating sentences were delivered with the heartbreaking naturalness of a child who does not yet fully comprehend the sheer magnitude of the tragedy unfolding around her. The innocent, uncomplaining acceptance in her voice left Arthur entirely paralyzed. He kept looking at her small profile, his sharp, analytical mind racing frantically through 100 different horrific scenarios. He felt a cold dread pooling in his stomach, utterly unaware that there was still much more to this devastating story, a darker, crueler reality that he did not yet know. Before Arthur could ask another question, a sudden commotion broke through the ambient noise of the park. From across the cobblestone square, a woman who looked to be about 35 years old came rushing frantically down the paved pathway. She was panting heavily, her chest heaving with every desperate breath. Her clothes were rumpled and her eyes were bloodshot, swollen, and wild, carrying the undeniable frantic look of someone who had been searching endlessly, driven by pure terror. "Oh, my sweet Lord," the breathless woman exclaimed, her voice cracking loudly in the quiet evening air. Her frantic eyes had finally landed on the small, still figure sitting on the park bench. "I finally found you. Oh, my precious girl, I finally found you." This distressed, weeping woman was Miss Clara. She was a hard-working, exhausted neighbor from the dilapidated, run-down boarding house where Lily and her mother rented a cramped, miserable room. Clara had spotted the faded floral dress from across the wide expanse of the square and had come sprinting toward them, completely disregarding the curious stares and murmurs of the surrounding tourists and evening strollers. The moment she approached, Arthur instinctively stood up. Without a second thought, his deep protective instincts flared to life. He positioned his tall, imposing frame directly in front of the child, shielding Lily from the approaching stranger. In the boardroom, he was a predator, but here on the dusty path of the park, he instantly became a guardian. "Do you know this little girl, ma'am?" he asked, his voice immediately returning to its deep, authoritative tone. It was a voice used to commanding entire skyscrapers, leaving no room for argument. Clara skidded to a halt, leaning forward and resting her hands on her knees as she gasped for air. "I certainly do, mister. I am her mother's next-door neighbor." Clara replied, her voice breaking with unshed tears and sheer overwhelming physical exhaustion. Clara paused for a long moment to catch her breath, clutching a hand tightly against her chest as she slowly stood up straight. She looked at Arthur, taking in his expensive suit and stern expression, but her focus quickly shifted to the heartbreaking reality she needed to explain. Mary, her sweet mother, she had a terrible fall at her cleaning job 3 days ago. Clara began, her voice trembling with righteous anger and deep sorrow. She was working late, trying to earn extra cash, and she hit her head hard on the marble floor. They took her away in an ambulance with the sirens blaring. We didn't even know what hospital they took her to at first. Clara wiped a tear from her cheek, her expression hardening into absolute disgust. and the heartless, wicked woman who runs our boarding house. The second she found out Mary was in a coma, and there was nobody left to pay the weekly rent, she packed up their few belongings. She threw this poor defenseless child out onto the street without a single second thought. She just locked the door and left her on the curb. Arthur felt his blood run entirely cold. His jaw clenched so tightly that his teeth ached. I have been walking these dangerous streets, searching every alley and park for this sweet angel for 2 whole days. Clara wept openly, sobbing now, as she looked at the little girl on the bench. She has been sleeping out here in the brutal cold for 2 nights. A baby. Just a baby? Lord, have mercy on us all. Arthur slowly turned his head to look down at Lily. The little girl was completely unbothered by the dramatic, tearful revelation happening just a few feet away. She was not crying over her own suffering. Instead, she was staring affectionately at her little blue Bible, admiring its worn cover, as if it were a shiny, priceless new toy, behaving exactly as any innocent child would do when holding something they loved. For 2 days, a defenseless 5-year-old girl had been sleeping on the unforgiving, dangerous streets of Savannah entirely by herself. She had navigated the terrifying darkness, clutching a battered book, as though it were a magical shield against the horrors of the world. Arthur stared at the little girl for a long, quiet moment. As he watched her gently trace the letters on the cover of the Bible, he felt a massive tectonic shift occurring deep within his soul. The heavy gold-plated doors of his heart, which had been locked tightly for 5 years, were violently ripped off their hinges. The ruthless billionaire vanished, replaced by a man who suddenly understood the profound fragility of human life. He turned his determined, fierce gaze back to the distressed neighbor. "Ma'am, you can stop searching. You can leave her in my care," he stated with unwavering, absolute authority. "I am going to take her up to the hospital right now so she can see her mother, and I will make sure she never spends another second on the streets." Clara blinked in surprise. She looked closely at the tall, handsome man in the expensive tailored suit. She noted the luxury watch on his wrist and the confident, powerful set of his shoulders. Then she looked down at little Lily, sitting so peacefully beside him. Clara evaluated his character with the inherent protective suspicion that hard-working folks naturally possess when dealing with wealthy strangers whose intentions they cannot verify. But surprisingly, it was the little girl who answered the unspoken question, lingering heavily in the humid evening air. "He is the one that God sent for us, Miss Clara," Lily announced, looking up from her book. She spoke those words with such profound certainty, such absolute lack of fear, that Clara instantly felt all her protective defenses crumble. The weary, tired woman let out a long, shuddering sigh of relief. She walked past Arthur, bent down to the child's level, and gently pressed a lingering kiss against Lily's dirty forehead. "All right then, my sweet girl," Clara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You go see your mama." Clara then stood back up, squared her tired shoulders, and fixed her tear-filled, serious eyes directly onto Arthur's face. She delivered a fierce maternal warning that carried the weight of the entire world. "You make sure you take good care of her, mister. You hear me? She has been through enough." Arthur did not flinch. He offered a solemn, respectful nod in return, his eyes locking onto Clara's with absolute sincerity. "You have my word. You can trust me." He promised, his voice low and vibrating with conviction. "I swear it." And with that firm reassurance, Clara turned around. She began to walk away, heading back down the tree-lined path, murmuring quiet, tearful prayers of gratitude under her breath, as her figure slowly disappeared into the thick evening crowd, leaving the billionaire and the little girl alone once more. But the universe was far from finished. Amidst all this newfound resolve, there remained a massive, earth-shattering detail that Arthur still did not know. It was a deeply buried secret concerning Mary, the injured mother, lying unconscious in a hospital bed miles away. It was a secret that was about to detonate the reality. He thought he understood a truth he was destined to discover before the sun fully set on Savannah. As Arthur reached into the inner breast pocket of his bespoke suit jacket to retrieve his phone, his mind was already shifting back into its familiar, highly efficient gears. He fully intended to summon his private driver to bring the luxury sedan around, prepared to navigate the sprawling hospital bureaucracy with the exact same cold calculated efficiency he applied to multi-million-dollar corporate mergers. He was ready to fix this tragic situation with his wealth. But before he dialed the familiar number, he realized he needed a single piece of basic information to secure her admission. He looked down at the little girl, who was now carefully zipping her ragged purse shut, making sure her precious Bible was safe. He asked the most important question of his entire life, completely unaware that the answer would tear his universe apart. "Lily, what is your mother's full name?" "Mary Grace Fletcher." The little girl replied instantly. Her voice was clear and bright, ringing out into the humid evening air like a small silver bell. The expensive smartphone nearly slipped completely through Arthur's suddenly numb fingers, tumbling downward and barely missing the hard, unforgiving cobblestones below. He managed to catch it clumsily, but he remained entirely frozen. His large hands hung suspended in the heavy air, his broad chest rising and falling rapidly as his lungs suddenly forgot how to draw breath. Mary Grace Fletcher. That specific name, that exact melodic sequence of words, was a terrifying phantom he had successfully avoided hearing for 5 grueling, relentless years. It was a name he had forcefully shoved into the absolute, darkest, most inaccessible corner of his mind. It was a pristine memory he had deliberately starved of light and air, because acknowledging it brought forth a profound, suffocating pain that was simply too unbearable for his ambitious, ruthless heart to manage. Before he could process the sheer impossibility of the situation, Lily moved. "My mama has a little dark mark right here," she stated brightly. To emphasize her point, Lily raised her small, unwashed hand and pointed a tiny finger directly to the left side of Arthur's strong jawline. She then touched her own tiny, perfect chin in the exact same spot, acting as if pointing out matching birthmarks on a wealthy stranger's face was the most natural occurrence in the world. "How did you know about that, mister?" she asked with genuine, innocent curiosity. Arthur mechanically shoved the phone back into his pocket, trying desperately to conceal the violent, uncontrollable trembling that had suddenly overtaken his hands. He could not answer her. The floodgates of his buried past had just burst wide open, sweeping away all his carefully constructed corporate defenses in a single, devastating tidal wave of memory. 5 years ago, Arthur was not a powerful millionaire commanding a massive corporate empire from a glass-walled penthouse. He was a fiercely determined but completely broke 28-year-old man. He had no money, no steady employment, and was barely surviving in a dingy, damp-rented room on the forgotten outskirts of the city. And Mary Grace Fletcher had been the quiet, incredibly hard-working girl living in the tiny, equally miserable room right next to his. She was simple, profoundly kind, and possessed a radiant, genuine smile that could effortlessly illuminate the dim, depressing hallway of that dilapidated boarding house. They had started as friendly neighbors, sharing cheap meals, quickly became close confidants, and eventually blossomed into something much deeper, something pure and undeniably beautiful. For several magical months, despite their grinding poverty, they were the absolute center of each other's universe. Mary had believed in him when he was nothing. She had supported his wild dreams when the rest of the world had firmly shut its doors in his face. But then, the golden opportunity finally arrived. A highly lucrative corporate offer at a massive, prestigious firm located in a different city entirely. It was the break he had been starving for. Arthur had packed his meager belongings in a single afternoon. He left the boarding house in a frantic rush, kissing Mary passionately and promising her with fierce, burning conviction that he would return. He swore to her that he was just going to secure their future, that everything would be perfect, and that he would come back to sweep her away to a beautiful, luxurious life where she would never have to scrub another floor again. But he never returned. He never came back to get her. The fast-paced corporate life accelerated. Massive amounts of money began rolling in, accompanied by intoxicating power elite social circles and endless demands. In the intoxicating blur of his sudden ascent, Mary was left behind. She became a casualty of his blind ambition, locked away in a mental drawer that he actively, cowardly refused to open ever again. And now, against all the impossible odds of the universe, Mary's daughter was sitting right beside him on a park bench in the middle of Savannah. This tiny, beautiful child had slept completely alone on the dangerous, freezing streets for 2 agonizing nights. She had clutched a simple blue book as her greatest treasure, entirely oblivious to the true, shameful identity of the wealthy man who had just bought her a warm pretzel. Arthur felt a desperate, overwhelming urge to fall to his knees and weep until his lungs gave out. The guilt was a physical weight, crushing his ribs, demanding payment for 5 years of silence. But before a single sound of grief could escape his tight, burning throat, the harsh, aggressive vibrating of his phone shattered the delicate moment. It buzzed relentlessly against his ribs, a harsh reminder of the cold world he now inhabited. Swallowing the massive lump of emotion, he pulled the device out and answered it. It was his trusted business partner, Ryan. The voice echoing through the earpiece was incredibly tense, laced with an unmistakable, frantic panic. "Arthur, thank God you answered. We need to talk right this second. You need to get back to the office now." Ryan, breathless, demanded. "It is about Ivy. She went down to the county courthouse first thing this morning." Ivy, Arthur's glamorous high society girlfriend of 2 years. She was undeniably beautiful, always impeccably dressed in the latest designer fashions, and was a constant glittering fixture at the most exclusive aristocratic parties in the city. However, beneath her polished exterior, she possessed a deep, ugly disdain for anyone without massive wealth. She had never once attempted to hide her cruel prejudice, treating service staff and common workers as if they were entirely invisible. Arthur had tolerated her shallowness because she fit perfectly into the powerful image he was trying to project. But there had never been any true warmth between them. What exactly was she doing at the courthouse? Arthur demanded, his voice dropping into a dangerous, icy register, though his chest was already tightening with a terrible, dark premonition. She officially filed a legal petition declaring that you are mentally unfit to manage your own assets. Ryan blurted out the words, rushing out in a terrified stream. She is attempting to stage a hostile takeover of your entire company, Arthur. She found a ruthless, highly connected attorney. They are putting together something massive, something airtight to take you down completely by tomorrow morning. Arthur pulled the phone an inch away from his ear, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. He ended the call without uttering another single word. Truthfully, Ryan's frantic, terrified warning was not breaking news. It was merely the final concrete confirmation of a waking nightmare he was already living. Earlier that exact same morning, before the sun had even fully risen, before he had stepped foot into his pristine glass-walled office, a thick, unmarked manila envelope had been hand-delivered directly to his private, highly secure residence. It was an anonymous, explosive package overflowing with damning legal drafts, printed screenshots of encrypted messages, and comprehensive lists of compromised corporate contacts. The contents were utterly devastating. Ivy, the woman he had foolishly allowed into his inner sanctum, the woman he believed held at least some genuine affection for him, had been meticulously plotting his total financial ruin for many long months. She had secretly retained an aggressive cutthroat lawyer. She had heavily bribed a fraudulent medical witness to testify against him under oath, and was actively preparing to legally register false claims that Arthur was suffering from severe psychological breakdowns, panic disorders, and was entirely incompetent to remain as a chief executive of his own hard-built empire. Her malicious, highly calculated plan was simple and completely devoid of human warmth. She intended to wait for a moment of extreme corporate exhaustion, ambush him with a massive mountain of complex, dense paperwork, and trick him into signing away all of his executive rights before he could fully comprehend the lethal trap she had set. She wanted absolutely everything. She wanted the lucrative subsidiary companies, the hidden offshore accounts, the sprawling real estate portfolio, and the massive billion-dollar fortune he had built through 5 years of relentless, backbreaking labor. And the absolute most insulting part of her grand sweeping scheme was her arrogant, unshakable belief that Arthur was still entirely ignorant. She truly believed he was wandering blindly in the dark, perfectly ready to step off the financial cliff she had carefully built for him. Arthur had fled his towering corporate building that very morning, gasping for air, as if the expensive glass walls were physically crushing him. He had ordered his driver to pull over near the park, desperately needing the open sky, the fresh air, and the quiet rustle of the ancient oak trees to process the immense betrayal and formulate a ruthless counterattack. He had been sitting on that exact bench, buckling under the suffocating heavy weight of an immense deception, when a tiny, fragile voice had appeared from nowhere and fundamentally altered the entire fabric of his reality. Now standing on the cobblestones with his phone tight in his grip, Arthur felt a strange, chilling calm wash over him. The contrast was absolutely staggering. His glamorous, wealthy girlfriend was actively trying to destroy him out of pure, unadulterated greed. Meanwhile, the woman he had selfishly abandoned in poverty had raised a beautiful, polite daughter who treated a worn Bible as her greatest treasure. "Are you feeling okay, mister?" Lily asked gently, pulling him back from the precipice of his dark thoughts. Her large, soulful eyes were studying his pale, heavily distressed face with genuine concern. Arthur desperately wanted to offer a reassuring lie, to say yes and protect her from his burdens. But looking down at her, he found himself completely incapable of deceiving a 5-year-old child who had slept on the cold pavement, yet still possessed the immense grace to worry about a wealthy stranger's well-being. Not really, Lily. He admitted, his deep voice dropping so low it was barely above a rough whisper. There is a very bad person who is trying to steal everything that I have worked for. Lily's soft, dirt-smudged features immediately molded into a mask of deep, serious concentration. She pondered this heavy adult information for a brief moment. And then, with that profound, serene calmness she possessed, she offered the only solution she knew. "Would you like me to say a prayer for you right now?" Arthur sat entirely frozen, staring at the little girl in profound, absolute disbelief. Here was a child without a safe, warm bed to sleep in. Here was a 5-year-old girl without any guarantee of where her next meal would come from, with her mother fighting for her very life in a cold hospital room miles away. She possessed absolutely nothing of material value in this world, save for a worn book and the faded clothes on her back. And yet, her first immediate instinct was to offer spiritual cover and emotional protection for a billionaire she had just met. He could not bring himself to say no. He could not deny her this beautiful gesture, and no one could have ever predicted the massive healing chain reaction that would immediately follow that heartfelt prayer. Ivy, sitting confidently in her luxurious, sprawling penthouse across town, sipping expensive champagne and dreaming of her hostile takeover, had absolutely no idea that at this exact second the massive, deceitful house of cards she had constructed was destined to completely collapse. Lily closed her large eyes, carefully pressed her tiny dirt-smudged palms together, and bowed her head in deep reverence. With the sweetest, most innocent voice Arthur had ever heard, a voice that seemed to temporarily mute the busy city sounds around them, the little girl began to speak to the heavens. "Dear Lord, you already know everything that is happening," she whispered softly. "You can see that this nice man is going through some bad stuff today. Please take good care of him, and please keep the bad people away. And please, Lord, take good care of my mama sleeping in the big hospital. And thank you so much for the yummy pretzel. Amen." It was beautifully, breathtakingly simple. Arthur kept his own eyes tightly shut for several long, heavy moments after her soft voice faded into the ambient noise of the park. There was a raw, undeniable, heavy power resting inside those broken, childish sentences. That simple prayer had miraculously managed to penetrate a hardened, impenetrable fortress deep inside his chest, a dark, lonely place. His immense wealth and corporate success had never been able to access, let alone heal. He finally opened his eyes, feeling as though a suffocating weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He stood up straight, his posture shifting from a man burdened by betrayal to a fierce, unstoppable protector. He made a quiet, irrevocable decision right then and there. "Lily," he said, his voice thick with a new, unbreakable resolve, "I am going to take you to the hospital right now so you can be with your mother. And after that, you are going to stay right by my side until she is fully better. Do you understand?" Lily looked up at him for a long time, her dark eyes analyzing his soul before finally speaking. "Are you the exact person that God promised to send us?" Arthur had absolutely no idea how to answer such a profound, heavy question. He was a deeply flawed man who had made terrible mistakes, but he was determined to make this right. So he simply reached down enveloped her tiny, fragile hand securely inside his own massive palm, and began walking purposefully toward where his black luxury sedan was waiting at the edge of the square. The ride to the sprawling city hospital was quiet, wrapped in a thick, emotional silence. Lily sat in the back of the spacious, leather-scented vehicle, her eyes wide as she looked at the expensive interior, but she never once let go of her battered purse. Arthur sat beside her, his mind racing with a chaotic mixture of intense guilt, fierce protectiveness, and a burning desire to see Mary again. Upon their arrival at the imposing medical center, the woman stationed at the front reception desk greeted them with a look of sheer bewilderment. It was a deeply jarring sight for anyone to process a towering, impossibly handsome man, wearing a bespoke thousands of dollars Italian suit, gently holding the hand of a tiny ragged child in a faded, unwashed dress. But Arthur paid zero attention to the judgmental stares radiating from the crowded waiting room. He did not care about their whispers. He marched directly to the front desk and fiercely loudly demanded to see Mary Grace Fletcher. His tone left absolutely no room for negotiation, and the deeply intimidated nurse quickly escorted them down a sterile, brightly lit and quiet corridor on the second floor. The attending physician, in charge of Mary's critical care, stepped out of the room to meet them. Her face was lined with deep, heavy exhaustion, yet her demeanor remained highly professional and kind. She looked between the wealthy titan and the homeless child, clearly confused by the dynamic. "Are you a member of the immediate family, sir?" The doctor inquired, holding a thick medical chart to her chest. "I am a very old, very close friend." Arthur replied, his posture completely rigid. "How exactly is her condition? Tell me everything." The doctor released a heavy, weary sigh. "She has sustained a moderate traumatic brain injury from the harsh impact on the marble floor. Her vital signs are currently stable, but she remains entirely unconscious. Her ability to fully recover is going to rely heavily on the quality of continuous specialized care she receives over the next few difficult weeks. She is going to require immense amounts of rest, highly advanced monitoring, and extensive rehabilitation." The doctor hesitated for a moment, her eyes dropping down to the chart before looking back up with a sympathetic, pained expression. "And well, the medical expenses are already accumulating rapidly. She does not appear to have any form of health insurance on our record. The administration is going to push for a transfer to a lower-tier state facility if," before the doctor could even finish her sentence, and without breaking eye contact for a single second, Arthur unbuttoned his tailored suit jacket. He fluidly retrieved his sleek leather wallet and pulled out a heavy matte black credit card, a card reserved only for the absolute highest echelon of global wealth. He placed the cold, exclusive piece of metal directly into the stunned doctor's palm. "You will put every single charge, every specialized procedure, and every experimental medication onto this specific card." Arthur commanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that echoed off the sterile walls. "There is absolutely no spending limit. You do whatever is medically necessary to save her life, regardless of the cost. You put her in your best private suite. You assign your top specialist round the clock, and you do not ever mention the word transfer to me again. Do we understand each other?" The doctor stared completely dumbfounded at the exclusive piece of metal resting in her hand. She had only heard rumors of such accounts. She looked up at Arthur's deadly serious expression, realizing he was entirely capable of buying the entire hospital if he so chose. Finally, she glanced down at little Lily. The child was holding Arthur's hand tightly, her small purse securely tucked under her other arm, watching the exchange with quiet faith. "Yes, sir, I understand completely." The doctor breathed, slipping the card into her pocket. "Now, can I please go in and see my mama now?" Lily asked in a quiet, hopeful whisper, tugging gently on Arthur's sleeve. The doctor gave a soft nod and pushed open the heavy wooden door, allowing them to step into the dim, quiet room. Mary was lying completely still in the center of the large hospital bed. Her skin was heartbreakingly pale against the crisp white sheets, and a thick, stark white bandage was wrapped securely around her head. The rhythmic, agonizingly slow beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room. Lily approached the metal bed rail with slow, hesitant steps. She reached through the cold steel bars, placed her tiny warm hand directly over her mother's limp, pale fingers, and stood perfectly still. Then, with a voice that held absolutely no fear and did not tremble in the slightest, she spoke into the quiet, sterile room. "Mama, I am right here with you. I am completely safe. You do not have to worry anymore." Lily gently squeezed her mother's hand. "God sent a man to help us exactly like you promised he would. He is really nice. You can rest easy now." Standing just a few feet away, Arthur felt a sudden, massive, crushing sensation erupt in his chest. The walls of his guilt finally caved in entirely. He had to physically step backward out of the room, unable to bear the beautiful, agonizing weight of Lily's pure faith. He stood completely alone in the cold, bright hallway, leaning heavily against the pristine white wall. His deep eyes burned fiercely as an unfamiliar, powerful tide of hot tears threatened to spill over his lashes. And it was right there, in that lonely, vulnerable corridor, as he was breaking apart and putting himself back together, that the worst part of this chaotic day began its final, terrifying approach. Arthur stood in the quiet hallway, his large hand rubbing his tired face, trying to process the overwhelming emotions swelling in his chest. But the brief moment of quiet reflection was abruptly shattered. His mobile phone began to vibrate violently once again in his pocket. He pulled it out, half expecting Ryan calling with more bad news. But this time, the caller ID displayed the name of his elite, highly aggressive corporate attorney, Marcus. Arthur tapped the screen and held the phone to his ear. The man's voice crackled through the small speaker, vibrating with an intense, aggressive urgency and the distinct, sharp edge of absolute triumph. "Arthur, we finally have her fully trapped." Marcus announced, his voice tight with adrenaline. "Ivy made a massive, catastrophic mistake. She utilized a fraudulent medical witness to sign her psychological competency documents exactly as you suspected. My private investigators just secured the undeniable hard proof of the financial transaction. We have the bank transfers, the recorded calls, everything. She paid him $50,000 to lie under oath." Arthur's eyes narrowed into cold, dangerous slits. The protective father vanished, and the ruthless billionaire, CEO, instantly returned to the surface. "Are you absolutely certain, Marcus, I need an ironclad guarantee before I drop the hammer?" "It is entirely bulletproof, Arthur." Marcus replied confidently. "If you give me the green light right now, we can legally destroy her entire life this very second. We can file for fraud, attempted corporate sabotage, and extortion. She will be looking at serious prison time." Arthur turned his head, looking through the narrow rectangular glass window set into the heavy hospital door. Inside the dim room, little Lily was still standing by the bed, holding her unconscious mother's limp hand. Her small, fragile head was bowed in yet another silent, deeply earnest prayer. She was a 5-year-old girl who had selflessly prayed for a deeply distressed stranger in a public park, never asking for a single thing in return. And miraculously, her pure, innocent salvation had arrived long before his own massive corporate battles were fully resolved. She had saved him in ways she could not possibly understand. "Do not file it yet, Marcus," Arthur commanded, his voice dropping into a deadly chilling whisper. "Hold the documents. I want to look her in the eye when she realizes she has lost everything." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. The worst part of this incredibly chaotic, emotionally draining day was still rapidly approaching, simply because the treacherous, arrogant Ivy was entirely unaware that she had already lost the war. She was a snake that still believed its venom was lethal, and once she realized her grand, sweeping scheme had completely evaporated, she was bound to unleash a massive, desperate storm that could threaten everything. Less than an hour later, the storm arrived. Ivy strutted confidently through the main sliding glass entrance of the hospital. She was sporting a venomous, triumphant smile that she did not yet realize would be her absolute last. She materialized at the far end of the second-floor corridor promptly at 6 o'clock in the evening, moving with the terrifying, radiating confidence of an apex predator who firmly believed the steel trap had finally snapped completely shut on its prey. She looked impossibly tall, elegant, and perfectly manicured. She was wearing a sleek blood-red designer dress and smelled heavily of an expensive, suffocating French perfume that instantly clashed with the sterile hospital air. Walking exactly half a step behind her was her highly paid, aggressively slick lawyer. The man clutched a thick, dark leather briefcase against his side, a briefcase containing the final damning legal documents she desperately needed Arthur to sign. She had utilized her extensive, highly connected network to track Arthur's private luxury vehicle to this specific medical center. She had decided to bypass the office entirely and ambush him here. Her grand strategy was straightforward and incredibly cruel. Arrive completely unexpectedly, apply massive, suffocating psychological pressure, and mercilessly intimidate him into immediate submission. She truly believed Arthur was in a highly vulnerable, fractured mental state. She was convinced he would blindly sign the transfer papers just to make the harassment stop entirely, without realizing he was willingly surrendering his massive corporate empire, his extensive banking accounts, and his sprawling global real estate portfolio. She had obsessively calculated every single variable of this massive betrayal. She was absolutely certain that the falsified psychological evaluations were fully legally binding, and that she remained 10 full steps ahead of him. The one crucial fatal element she had completely failed to calculate was that Arthur already possessed complete, undeniable knowledge of every single detail, every pathetic lie, and every forged signature. And he was sitting patiently on a hard plastic waiting chair in the hallway, quietly waiting for her to arrive. Ivy clicked her high heels sharply against the linoleum floor, abruptly halting her confident sweeping march when she spotted him. Arthur was sitting incredibly calmly, his broad shoulders relaxed. Lying peacefully across his lap, fast asleep, and completely exhausted from her horrific ordeal on the streets, was little Lily. She was curled into a small ball, clutching her ragged purse against her chest, her soft breaths rising and falling against Arthur's expensive suit jacket. Ivy's perfect aristocratic face briefly contorted into a horrible mask of unadulterated raw disgust at the sudden sight of the unwashed sleeping child resting against him. She quickly composed her features, but the sheer cruelty in her eyes remained. She glared down at Arthur with thinly veiled contempt. "What on earth is the absolute meaning of this?" she demanded. Her voice was kept deliberately low to avoid drawing the nurses, but it was as sharp and dangerous as a razor blade. "Why in the world are you sitting in a filthy public hospital holding a disgusting little street child?" Arthur did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. "Keep your voice down," he commanded in a low, dangerous rumble, entirely refusing to tear his fierce, protective gaze away from Lily's peacefully sleeping face. He gently placed a large hand over the little girl's ear to muffle the harsh sound. "Arthur, I am not playing games," Ivy hissed, taking a step closer, her lawyer hovering nervously behind her. "I need to speak with you immediately in private. We have a highly urgent, massive legal situation regarding the board of directors that requires your immediate signature right this second. If you refuse to sign these papers tonight, you are going to lose complete control of the executive board by tomorrow morning. It is over, Arthur. You are having a breakdown. Just sign the papers, and I will take care of everything." Arthur slowly, deliberately lifted his head. For the first time since she had confidently marched into the corridor, he locked his cold, highly calculating eyes directly onto hers. He looked at her with the exact same dead, completely emotionless, terrifying stare he strictly reserved for his most ruthless corporate competitors, the men who foolishly attempted to bluff their way through multi-million-dollar negotiations and ended up entirely bankrupt. It was a calm, bottomless, and utterly terrifying gaze that made the blood freeze in Ivy's veins. "Ivy, I know exactly what you did," he stated with absolute chilling precision. His voice was perfectly even devoid of any panic or fear. Ivy froze entirely. Her carefully constructed, arrogant facade of superiority did not shatter violently. Instead, it slowly, pathetically began to melt away, strongly resembling cheap peeling paint, washing rapidly down a filthy drain in a heavy rainstorm. I don't know what you are talking about. You are paranoid, Arthur," she stammered, taking a small, involuntary step backward. The arrogant venom had completely vanished from her suddenly trembling voice. "I know all about the fake medical witness," Arthur countered smoothly, his cold eyes never leaving her face. "I know his name, his address, and exactly how much money you stole from my private corporate accounts to secretly hire the corrupt man standing right next to you. I have every single piece of correspondence documented, heavily encrypted, and fully secured by my legal team." Ivy's slick attorney went completely pale, his eyes darting frantically toward the hospital exits. He nervously reached out, placing a trembling, sweaty hand on her shoulder, and urgently whispered into her ear, "Ivy, we need to leave. Right now. They have the wire transfers." She violently shook off his hand, her face suddenly contorting with a toxic mixture of intense rage, profound humiliation, and absolute terror. Her grand empire had crumbled in less than 30 seconds. Desperate and lashing out like a cornered animal, she glared viciously down at Lily. The loud whispering had awakened the child. Lily was now sitting up slightly, rubbing the sleep from her large eyes, and watching the dramatic, tense scene unfold with wide, highly alert curiosity. You are throwing our entire corporate empire away." Ivy suddenly spat, her voice rising in volume, dripping with pure, unadulterated malice. She pointed a manicured finger directly at the child. "You are ruining everything because you have lost your mind over some pathetic, filthy little street rat." It was precisely at that highly charged moment that Lily, a tiny 5-year-old child wearing a faded dress and broken sandals, sat completely up straight. She did not cry. She did not hide her face in Arthur's chest. Instead, she looked directly into the eyes of the glamorous, vicious woman and declared with a small, yet completely unshakable voice that echoed clearly off the sterile hospital walls, "I'm not from the streets, lady. I belong to the Lord." A heavy, incredibly stunned silence instantly descended upon the entire corridor. A passing nurse carrying a tray of medications stopped completely in her tracks, staring at the exchange in sheer shock. Ivy's aggressively slick lawyer immediately bowed his head in profound, absolute professional embarrassment, realizing they had just been morally decimated by a toddler. Ivy stood completely rigid, her mouth hanging slightly open, staring blankly at the little girl as if she had just been forcefully struck across the face with a heavy stone. All her wealth, all her expensive clothes, and all her venom were entirely powerless against the sheer radiant innocence of that single, unwavering sentence. And then, before Ivy could even attempt to recover her shattered dignity, an unexpected, miraculous event occurred. The heavy wooden door to Mary's hospital room burst suddenly open. The attending physician rushed out into the hallway, her deeply exhausted face completely transformed by sheer shock and overwhelming professional relief. "She is awake," the doctor announced breathlessly to the quiet corridor. "Her mother just woke up." "She is awake," the doctor announced breathlessly to the quiet corridor. "Her mother just woke up." Lily released a sudden, piercingly joyful scream that reverberated beautifully down the entire length of the sterile hallway. Without a single second of hesitation, she scrambled frantically off Arthur's lap, her worn sandals hitting the linoleum floor with a soft thud. She sprinted as fast as her little legs could possibly carry, her pushing past the stunned doctor and rushing straight into the dim hospital room. Arthur remained perfectly still for a brief, heavy second. He slowly stood up, towering over the shattered remains of Ivy's grand, malicious scheme. He turned his cold, unforgiving gaze back to Ivy, who was already taking rapid, defeated steps backward alongside her deeply panicked lawyer. All her power, all her arrogance had been completely neutralized by a child's pure faith and a doctor's miraculous announcement. "You may leave now." Arthur stated, his voice ringing with absolute, terrifying finality. "And if you ever show your face in my city again, I will not hesitate to ruin you. Do not ever come back." Ivy turned sharply on her expensive designer heels. She practically fled down the long corridor without uttering a single word of protest, her aggressive lawyer scurrying desperately right behind her. Her massive, obsessive ambitions, which had taken months to carefully construct, had been entirely destroyed in a matter of minutes. Arthur did not watch her leave. He took a deep, steadying breath, preparing his heart for an entirely different kind of storm, and slowly walked through the heavy wooden door into the hospital room. Inside, the atmosphere had completely transformed. Lily was standing as tall as she could on her tiptoes, tightly gripping her mother's pale hand through the metal bed rails. Mary was weeping hot, relentless tears streaming rapidly down her pale, bruised cheeks, while simultaneously laughing with a pure, unfiltered joy that filled the quiet room with sudden, beautiful warmth. As Arthur softly closed the door behind him, the subtle click of the latch drew Mary's attention. She slowly turned her head, her deeply exhausted dark eyes fluttering open. She saw her precious, beautiful daughter first, her gaze washing over Lily with profound, desperate relief. And then her tired gaze drifted slowly upward, landing squarely on the tall, handsome man standing quietly by the door. Mary stopped laughing. She stared at him. She kept staring, her breath catching painfully in her dry throat, until her dark, soulful eyes overflowed with a fresh, overwhelming wave of tears. He looked older, hardened by the brutal corporate world, dressed in clothes that cost more than she made in a year. But beneath the expensive suit and the guarded expression, he was still the exact same man she had fallen desperately in love with 5 long years ago. "Arthur," she whispered. Her voice was incredibly rough, weak, and broken from days of silent, terrifying unconsciousness. Yet it carried the undeniable, heavy weight of 1,000 unspoken words. Lily remained faithfully stationed on the right side of the hospital bed, entirely refusing to let go of her mother's hand. Arthur approached with slow, hesitant steps. He stood awkwardly on the left side of the mattress, suddenly feeling entirely unsure of what to do with his own large empty hands. The powerful billionaire who had just effortlessly crushed a hostile corporate takeover was now trembling like a frightened child in the presence of the woman he had selfishly abandoned. "How did you manage to find me?" Mary asked her, throat still raspy, her eyes tracing the familiar lines of his handsome face. "It was not me who found him. Mama?" Lily chimed in eagerly, her small, dirt-smudged face absolutely glowing with an innocent, overwhelming love. "I found him in the park." "It was her who found me," Arthur corrected softly, his eyes completely locked onto Mary's fragile, bruised face. "She saved me, Mary." "Mama, you were totally right," Lily announced proudly. "God really did send someone to help us, exactly like you said. He bought me a warm pretzel, and he chased the bad lady away." Mary closed her eyes for a long, heavy second, processing the sheer impossible miracle of his presence. When she slowly opened them again, they were completely flooded with deep, sorrowful tears. Her expression shifted, pulling tight with an agonizing mixture of fear, immense relief, and a desperate burning need to finally cleanse her soul. "Arthur, there is something incredibly important that I have to tell you right now." Mary rasped her weak fingers, gripping the white bed sheets. "I should have found a way to tell you so many years ago. I should have tried much harder to track you down to make you listen. You do not need to explain anything right now, Mary. Please just rest." Arthur pleaded, his voice cracking with intense emotion, desperately wanting to spare her the physical exhaustion of speaking. "I will take care of everything. You are safe now." "No. Yes, I need to do this," she insisted firmly, drawing a long, violently shuddering breath that seemed to pull from the absolute very depths of her weary soul. She looked directly into his eyes, refusing to look away. "Arthur, Lily is your biological daughter." The silence that instantly swallowed the hospital room was so absolute, so incredibly heavy, that the faint, steady, rhythmic beeping of the medical monitors sounded exactly like crashing thunder. Arthur stood entirely paralyzed. His brilliant, highly analytical mind, capable of processing massive amounts of complex corporate data in seconds, completely shut down, violently struggling to process the sheer impossible magnitude of her words. He looked down at Mary's tear-stained face, searching for any sign of deception, but found only the raw, agonizing truth. Slowly, as if moving underwater, he deliberately turned his head to look at little Lily. He stared deeply into those large, dark eyes, those beautiful, incredibly soulful eyes that he had mistakenly assumed belonged entirely to her mother. But standing there, bathed under the harsh, bright fluorescent hospital lights, looking at her truly for the absolute first time, the blinders of his ambition finally fell away. He saw the undeniable, shattering truth. He saw his own distinct, sharp brow line. He saw the exact shape of his own nose. He looked at her small, crossed arms and saw a perfect, undeniable reflection of his own forgotten humanity staring back at him. How could he have possibly been so blind he had not recognized his own flesh and blood, because he had spent the last 5 years looking at the world with the cold, disconnected eyes of a man who only saw strangers' competitors and financial statistics. But this precious, beautiful little girl had never been a stranger. She was a piece of his own soul, walking around outside his body in a faded floral dress. "I only found out that I was carrying a child a few short weeks after you packed your bags and moved away." Mary continued, her voice constantly breaking under the immense, crushing weight of the 5-year confession. "I tried to call your phone, Arthur. I tried so many times. But the automated voice said the number had already been changed. You completely disappeared. I had absolutely no idea which massive company you went to or what city you were even living in." A single tear slipped down Mary's cheek. The hard months slowly turned into exhausting years, and I just kept working. I tried my absolute best to raise her all by myself. I worked day and night scrubbing floors and cleaning houses, trying desperately to give her every single thing that I could to make sure she was loved. Arthur found himself entirely incapable of forming a single coherent word. A massive, intensely suffocating knot had formed tight in his throat. It was a knot composed of 5 agonizing years of complete absence. 5 long years of his own precious flesh and blood, growing, learning to walk, and struggling in grinding poverty, entirely without his fierce protection. 5 years of a dedicated, incredible woman, working herself straight to the bone in the dark shadows, never complaining and never begging the cruel universe for a handout. This was a truly remarkable woman who, despite residing in the absolute darkest depths of poverty, had successfully, beautifully taught her daughter to hold on to faith with an unbreakable iron grip. She had taught little Lily to carefully store a cheap, heavily worn Bible inside a ragged purse and treat it as though it were the most valuable treasure on earth, because in the end it was. It was the greatest treasure that existed, for it had kept her gentle spirit alive when the entire world and her own father had completely abandoned her. Lily stood incredibly quietly by the bed. Her dark eyes were darting rapidly back and forth between the 2 weeping adults, observing their profound emotional collapse with solemn, deeply respectful silence. Then, breaking the heavy, suffocating tension in the room, she asked a question with that small, piercingly direct voice that possessed the power to shatter mountains. "Mr. Does that mean you are my daddy?" Arthur's strong legs finally completely gave out. He collapsed straight downward, falling heavily onto his knees, directly onto the cold, hard linoleum floor of the hospital room, just so he could be perfectly at eye level with his little girl. His handsome face was completely red-hot, tears streaming freely and uncontrollably down his cheeks, soaking into his expensive collar, but he fiercely refused to look away from her. Arthur reached out with both of his large shaking hands and gently grasped Lily's tiny shoulders, treating her as if she were made of the most fragile, priceless glass on earth. The overwhelming surge of paternal love that crashed over him was so intense it physically ached. Yes, he choked out, his voice trembling violently. Yes, my sweet, beautiful Lily, I am your daddy, and I have made so many terrible, incredibly selfish mistakes in my life. I was blind, and I was foolish, and I left when I should have stayed. But if you will allow me, if you and your mama will give me just one single chance to make this right, I desperately want to stay right here with you forever. I will never, ever let you go again. I promise you that. Lily's soft, dirt-smudged face instantly molded into a mask of deep, highly serious contemplation. She slowly crossed her tiny arms over her chest, displaying that exact same stubborn, incredibly resolute posture that he now firmly recognized as a mirror image of his own. She pondered his tearful, desperate request for a long, quiet moment, evaluating his sincerity. And then, with the absolute authority of a queen, she delivered her final verdict. Okay, you can stay. She nodded solemnly. But you are definitely going to have to learn how to pray properly. A sudden, massive, and entirely overwhelming burst of laughter abruptly erupted from Arthur's chest. It was a deep, wet, incredibly genuine laugh that rumbled outward from a place he thought had died many years ago. It was a specific, beautiful sound a human heart makes when something that has been violently shattered into a million pieces finally begins to knit itself back together. Hearing his booming, joyous laughter, Mary also began to laugh, her bright, joyful sounds, mixing perfectly with the steady flow of happy tears washing down her pale face. Seeing her parents smiling together for the first time in her life, Lily reached out. She took Arthur's large, heavily shaking hand in her left hand and carefully took her mother's fragile, bruised fingers in her right. She squeezed them tightly together, linking their broken family back into a single, unbreakable chain, and softly closed her eyes. "Dear Lord, thank you so much," Lily whispered. "You really did send my daddy back to us. You fixed my mama's head so she could wake up. You really do know everything. Amen." 2 weeks later, the warm, golden sunlight of a beautiful Georgia afternoon poured down over the sprawling Savannah Medical Center. The heavy automatic sliding glass doors opened with a soft mechanical hum, and Arthur stepped out into the bright, humid air. He was a completely transformed man. The cold, ruthless billionaire who had sat on a park bench buckling under the suffocating weight of corporate betrayal was entirely gone. In his place stood a fiercely devoted father and a deeply humbled partner. Resting securely in his strong, protective arms was a deeply happy, thoroughly clean little girl. Lily was wearing a brand new, beautiful white sundress. Her light brown hair finally brushed into soft, perfect curls that bounced gently with every step he took. She was no longer clutching her ragged purse with terrified desperation. Instead, the small battered blue Bible was safely tucked away inside a small, elegant new backpack, strapped to her shoulders, remaining close to her heart, but no longer her absolute only defense against a cruel, dark world. She had her father for that now. Walking slowly, but steadily right beside him, was Mary. She was still physically weak, her steps careful and measured, but the thick bandages had finally been removed. She was leaning heavily against Arthur's broad shoulder for support, but she was finally standing on her own 2 feet, ready to begin their new, incredibly beautiful life together as a united family. As they stepped out into the vibrant, bustling afternoon, Arthur felt the warm sun on his face. He looked at the massive, gleaming luxury sedan waiting for them at the curb, and then he looked down at the precious, smiling little girl resting safely in his arms. In that quiet, profound moment, Arthur realized a fundamental, earth-shattering truth. The massive billion-dollar corporate empire he had spent 5 ruthless, back-breaking years building was completely, utterly insignificant compared to the physical weight of the child he was holding. He had spent his entire adult life aggressively climbing a lonely, treacherous, and deeply isolating mountain of blind ambition. He had been so firmly convinced that vast wealth and endless capital were the absolute only reliable shields against a harsh, unforgiving world. He had truly believed that relying on others or believing in miracles was merely a pathetic crutch, meant only for the weak. Yet all his massive wealth and brilliant corporate strategy had entirely failed to protect him from the vicious, greedy betrayal brewing inside his own home. Instead of logic and money saving him, the universe had sent a tiny, unwashed child wearing a faded floral dress and broken shoes. It had sent a little girl who had been entirely discarded by society, but who carried a battered blue book with far more reverence and dignity than a king holds his golden crown. Through her innocent, completely unwavering faith, a broken, lost man was entirely rebuilt from the ground up. Arthur finally realized that the deep, profound love he had callously abandoned in his desperate, blind sprint toward financial success had never actually withered away. It had not died in the miserable shadows of that dilapidated boarding house. Instead, it had patiently, beautifully waited for him to finally open his blind eyes. We often carry the crushing, suffocating weight of our past failures, terrified of the consequences. We constantly assume that we face an impossible, devastating toll for our selfish choices, believing we are entirely unworthy of forgiveness. But Arthur found that instead of harsh punishment, he was met with the breathtaking, overwhelming mercy of a second chance. He learned the absolute hardest and yet the most profoundly beautiful lesson of his entire life. The miracles we so desperately need to save our souls rarely arrive in majestic, obvious packages. They do not come with loud announcements or massive bank transfers. They come quietly disguised in the simple, fragile moments we almost ignore. They come to prove that no matter how far we stray into the darkness, no matter how many terrible mistakes we make, redemption is always patiently waiting for us to simply look down, open our hearts, and meet the gentle eyes of grace. Arthur gently placed a soft kiss on Lily's forehead, making her giggle brightly. He then reached out carefully, wrapping his free arm around Mary's waist, pulling her close against his side. She leaned into his strength, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady, calm beating of his reborn heart. They had a long, challenging road of healing ahead of them. There were years of lost time to make up for and countless new memories to create. But as Arthur opened the heavy car door and helped his family safely inside, he knew with absolute certainty that he would never ever walk that road alone again. The emptiness was gone forever. If this emotional journey of love redemption and the beautiful power of second chances touched your heart today, please share this story with someone who might need a gentle reminder that miracles truly exist. We would love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment below and let us know what part of Lily's faith inspired you the most. Do not forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to join our family for more heartwarming and inspiring stories. Until next time, stay blessed.